And I think she's one of the best ones who ever lived. At her very finest, she is incomparable.
Richard Burton spent a lifetime surrounded by extraordinary women. Some adored him, some forgave him, others walked away with broken hearts. His deep voice, magnetic presence, and unmistakable charm made him one of Hollywood's greatest stars. But behind the applause lived a man forever searching for something he could never quite hold on to. 5 marriages, countless headlines, and one romance that captivated the world made his love life almost as famous as his films. Yet, as the years passed and the spotlight began to fade, Burton quietly looked back on the choices that had shaped his life. Before the final curtain fell, he revealed a truth that surprised many, and confirmed what others had suspected all along. It was never about how many women loved him, it was about the one woman he never truly stopped loving. The woman who believed in him before the world did. Long before Hollywood called his name, Richard Burton was simply a young Welsh actor with an extraordinary voice and an uncertain future. Fame was still a distant dream. The bright lights of London and Los Angeles seemed almost unimaginable. But there was one woman who already believed he was destined for greatness. Her name was Sybil Williams. They met in the late 1940s while working in the theater, where both were trying to build careers on the stage. Unlike the glamorous women who would later surround Burton, Sybil understood the quiet struggles that came before success. She saw the determined young man behind the powerful performances, and she fell in love with him before the world ever applauded. They married in 1949, beginning a life filled with hope rather than luxury. Their first years together were modest. Money was often scarce, and Burton accepted whatever acting roles he could find. Sybil stood beside him through every disappointment and every small victory, never asking for fame or fortune. She believed in his talent when very few others did. As Burton's reputation grew, so did the demands of his career. Bigger roles brought longer absences. International success transformed him into one of Britain's brightest stars, opening doors that neither of them had imagined when they exchanged their wedding vows. Together they welcomed 2 daughters, creating what seemed from the outside to be a happy family. Yet success has a way of changing more than a bank account. It changes routines, friendships, temptations, and sometimes even the people themselves. Burton suddenly found himself moving through glamorous circles filled with celebrated actors, lavish parties, and constant admiration. The attention was intoxicating, and the simple life he had once cherished slowly began slipping away. Sybil noticed the distance long before the newspapers did. She watched the man she loved become someone the entire world wanted to claim. Sometimes, the first cracks in a marriage appear in silence. Neither of them could have known that another woman was about to enter Richard Burton's life, one whose quiet presence would challenge his heart long before the world ever heard the name Elizabeth Taylor. The secret romance that changed everything. By the mid-1950s, Richard Burton had become one of Britain's most admired actors. Directors praised his extraordinary voice, audiences filled theaters to watch him perform, and critics believed he was destined for cinematic greatness. To the public, he appeared to have everything: a flourishing career, a devoted wife, and a promising future. But behind the curtain, another story was quietly unfolding. While working in the theater and later on screen, Burton grew close to actress Claire Bloom. She possessed an elegance that perfectly matched his intelligence, and the two shared something deeper than simple attraction. They loved literature, Shakespeare, and long conversations that stretched well beyond rehearsals. Friends noticed an undeniable chemistry whenever they were together. Their relationship remained largely hidden from public view. Unlike the explosive romances that would later dominate newspaper headlines, this was a quieter connection, built on admiration, shared ambition, and emotional understanding. Burton was still married to Sybil, making the relationship deeply complicated. Those closest to him could see that he was torn between the loyalty he owed his family and the growing feelings he could no longer ignore. Claire later described Burton as brilliant, charming, and emotionally unpredictable. One day he could be warm and affectionate. The next, he seemed distant, as though wrestling with battles no one else could see. As Burton's fame continued to rise, so did the pressures surrounding him. Film offers arrived from Hollywood, interviews became more frequent, and admirers seemed to appear everywhere he went. The attention fed both his confidence and his restlessness. The marriage that had once been his safe harbor was beginning to drift into troubled waters. Success often brings opportunities, but it also brings temptations. Years later, Burton would acknowledge that Claire Bloom had been one of the most important women in his life. Yet even this meaningful relationship would soon be overshadowed by a romance so extraordinary that it would captivate the entire world. Because in 1962, on the sun-drenched set of Cleopatra, Richard Burton was about to meet a woman whose arrival would change not only his own life, but the history of Hollywood itself. When Elizabeth Taylor turned Hollywood upside down. In 1962, the world was already watching the making of Cleopatra. It was one of the most expensive films ever attempted, plagued by delays, soaring costs, and endless rumors. Yet no one imagined that the greatest drama would unfold away from the cameras. Richard Burton had been cast opposite Elizabeth Taylor, the dazzling actress whose beauty and fame had already made her a global icon. Both were married to other people when filming began. Burton was still married to Sybil Williams. Taylor was married to singer Eddie Fisher. At first, they were simply co-stars, but long hours on set soon turned into private conversations, shared laughter, and a connection that neither seemed willing or able to resist. Burton was captivated by Taylor's wit as much as her beauty. She admired his intelligence, his commanding voice, and the passion he brought to every scene. Before long, whispers spread across the film's set. Then, the whispers became headlines. Photographers followed them everywhere. Newspapers published story after story, transforming their relationship into an international obsession. What had begun as a private affair quickly became one of the biggest celebrity scandals the world had ever witnessed. Religious leaders, politicians, and journalists openly criticized the romance, while millions of readers eagerly followed every new development. The pressure was enormous. Families were torn apart. Two marriages crumbled beneath the weight of public scrutiny and personal choices. Burton's marriage to Sybil quietly came to an end, while Taylor's marriage also collapsed as the controversy intensified. Yet neither Burton nor Taylor appeared willing to walk away. If anything, the criticism seemed to strengthen their bond. Sometimes, the louder the world protests, the stronger two hearts cling to each other. In 1964, Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor married, becoming Hollywood's most talked-about couple overnight. To many, they seemed destined for a fairy tale ending. Instead, they were stepping into a love story filled with breathtaking passion, unimaginable luxury, fierce arguments, and heartbreak. A relationship so intense that one marriage would never be enough, and one goodbye would never be the end. Two weddings, endless heartbreak. When Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor married in 1964, it felt as though Hollywood itself had stopped to watch. They were no longer simply actors. Together, they had become the most famous couple in the world. Everywhere they went, cameras followed. Their lives became front-page news almost daily. Every vacation, every argument, every expensive gift seemed to fascinate the public. Burton bought Taylor dazzling jewels, including some of the most remarkable gemstones ever owned by a Hollywood actress. Their homes reflected a life of extraordinary success, but behind those elegant doors, happiness proved far more difficult to protect. They shared a rare connection. Both were fiercely intelligent, deeply emotional, and passionate about literature and acting. They challenged one another in ways few couples ever could. Together, they made 11 films, creating unforgettable performances that reflected the chemistry audiences could see both on and off the screen. But the very qualities that drew them together also pulled them apart. Neither was willing to surrender during an argument. Their disagreements became legendary among friends and colleagues. Burton's growing dependence on alcohol only made matters worse. What began as celebration often ended in painful misunderstandings, with emotions running higher than either of them could control. Even so, love refused to disappear. After divorcing in 1974, many believed their remarkable story had finally ended. It hadn't. Only 16 months later, Burton and Taylor surprised the world by marrying each other again. Hope returned almost overnight. Admirers wanted to believe that true love had conquered every obstacle. Sadly, reality proved more complicated. The old wounds had never fully healed. The same struggles that had divided them before quietly resurfaced, and within a year, they divorced once again. Some hearts know only one great love, yet still cannot find lasting peace. Their second farewell seemed final, but it was not the end of Burton's search for happiness. Other women would enter his life, offering companionship, kindness, and new beginnings. Yet none of them could escape the silent shadow of the woman the world simply called Elizabeth, the woman who could never replace her. After his second divorce from Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton told friends he wanted something quieter. The endless headlines, the photographers waiting outside hotels, and the emotional storms had left him exhausted. Perhaps, he hoped, a calmer life would finally bring him peace. For a brief time, it seemed possible. Not long after the divorce, Burton became engaged to Princess Elizabeth of Yugoslavia. Intelligent, graceful, and well-respected, she offered a very different world from Hollywood. Their friendship quickly deepened, and many believed marriage would follow. It never did. The engagement quietly ended before wedding plans could become reality. Neither spoke publicly in great detail about the separation, and Burton once again found himself beginning a new chapter alone. In 1976, he married Susie Miller, a former model whose warmth and youthful spirit seemed to brighten his life. Burton genuinely hoped this marriage would succeed. Friends noticed that he tried to create a more stable home, away from the constant chaos that had defined his years with Elizabeth Taylor. But comparisons were impossible to escape. Wherever Burton went, people still asked about Elizabeth. Magazine articles rarely mentioned Susie without bringing up his famous former wife. Even when he tried to move forward, the past seemed determined to follow him. The marriage gradually unraveled, ending after several years together. By the early 1980s, Burton's health had begun to decline. His years of heavy drinking had taken a visible toll, and the energetic actor who once commanded every stage now appeared increasingly weary. Then came Sally Hay. Unlike the glamorous romances that had filled newspaper headlines, Sally brought something Burton had long been missing: privacy. They married in 1983 and shared a quieter life, far from much of the public attention that had surrounded his earlier relationships. Sometimes, peace arrives after the applause has faded. Sally stood beside him during his final year, offering comfort and companionship when he needed both most. Yet even as life grew quieter, one question refused to disappear. When Richard Burton looked back on every woman who had shared his journey, whose name still echoed most deeply within his heart, his final confession about the woman who owned his heart. Burton had loved more than once. He had married 5 times, experienced both devotion and disappointment, and spent decades searching for lasting peace. Yet, with the passing of time, he became increasingly reflective. Those closest to him noticed that conversations often drifted back to the same woman, Elizabeth Taylor. He never claimed their relationship had been perfect. In truth, it was anything but. They had hurt one another, argued fiercely, and watched 2 marriages fall apart beneath the weight of fame, pride, and personal struggles. Burton knew that alcohol had played a painful role in many of the mistakes he regretted most. But regret has a way of revealing what pride once concealed. In his journals and private reflections, Burton spoke with remarkable honesty about the woman who had changed his life forever. He admired her generosity, her courage, and the extraordinary bond they had shared. Even after they divorced for the second and final time, their connection never completely disappeared. They remained in contact, and beneath the years of disappointment, genuine affection endured. No other relationship carried the same emotional depth. The women who came after Elizabeth brought companionship, kindness, and new beginnings. Each deserved respect for the role she played in Burton's life. Yet none occupied the place that Elizabeth had carved into his heart decades earlier. Some loves do not last forever, but they leave forever behind. Richard Burton died in 1984 at the age of 58, leaving behind an unforgettable legacy on stage and screen. Yet for many who knew his story, his greatest performance was never found in a film. It was the way one remarkable woman continued to shape his heart long after the cameras stopped rolling. If Richard Burton's story reminded you that love can be both beautiful and complicated, let us know in the comments. Do you believe some people only experience one great love in a lifetime? And if you enjoyed timeless stories from Hollywood's golden age, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Legendary Archives, and join us for another journey into the lives behind the legends.